In 2008, Giles Ziltatro's wife moved to Edmonton, Canada for work, and Giles stayed behind for a little bit so he could wait for their house to sell and also work some more. But then after he moved to Edmonton to join her, his wife had a surprise in store for him. She wanted a divorce, and Giles was totally blindsided by this. At 33 years old, the last thing he was expecting was to find himself single again and alone in a totally new city. But after a while, once the pain of his divorce subsided, he started thinking about dating again. So Giles decided to explore the world of online dating. Giles created an account and chose his username, Doctor_X. He messaged with a handful of women, but the conversation seemed to go nowhere. A woman using the name Spiderwebs with two Z's caught his attention. Something about her was captivating to Giles. So Giles sent the young woman an instant message, and he got a reply back almost immediately. She told him that her name was Sheena, and that she lived in the Edmonton neighborhood of Millwoods. Sheena asked Giles if he had any plans that weekend. And Giles' heart started to race a bit, because for him, he told her he was free that weekend, and she asked if he wanted to hang out that Friday. "I'll think about it," she wrote, and then another message came in. "How about dinner and a movie?" she asked. "Sounds good," Giles wrote back. So the date was set for 7 o'clock that Friday, October 3rd, and she asked him to come pick her up. But then she gave him some very specific instructions on what to do after he arrived to pick her up. He'd have to drive through an alley and park in the back of the house to access it. So he'd have to enter the backyard by first going through the garage. Once inside, all he'd have to do is walk through the backyard and knock on the door of the basement. The next evening, on Tuesday night, Giles opened his web browser to check his messages, and there was a reply from Sheena. He read her message, and it contained very precise, descriptive directions to the house, and even more detail concerning how to get in through the garage and access the basement door. But weirdly, she didn't include the specific address. Instead, she just described the house. "At least give me your phone number in case I get lost," Giles wrote back. Sheena replied that she didn't give out her phone number or address for safety reasons. But, she added, if the date went well, he could have her phone number, no problem. On Friday morning, the morning of the big date, Giles went to work, already waiting for the day to end. And then when the clock struck 6, all that remained of Giles at the office was a vapor trail. He took the right turn down the alleyway, and seeing the garage door partly cracked, he knew he'd reached the right location. He noticed a bunch of garbage and an old couch leaning up against the fence. He turned off the truck and stepped out and approached the garage door, which was open enough that all he needed to do was crouch a bit to get inside. Now, once inside the garage, he saw that it was pretty dirty. In one corner of the garage, he saw an old wooden chair and a steel drum. So intent Giles was on finding that he totally overlooked the green tarp that covered most of the other side of the garage and everything beneath it. Once he found the door, he made a beeline toward it, not wanting to be any later for his date than he already was. And as he reached out and turned the doorknob, someone, Sheena was his first thought, grabbed him from behind. And before Giles could even process what was happening, began beating him in the head. Then the person behind him reached around and pressed into his chest with what he later realized was a stun baton. Giles tried to run, but he got wedged between a pair of shelving units. When he turned around to face his attacker, a figure in a hockey mask, painted black and gold, with their head covered completely by a hoodie. The figure lurched forward with the stun gun and continued prodding Giles in the chest, though it wasn't having any noticeable effect. Giles struggled toward the garage door, and the figure continued trying to stun him with the baton. But for some reason, which he would later realize were the sneaky effects of the stun baton, he barely had any muscle power, and the blows he kept landing were weak. And just then, the man drew a handgun and pointed it at Giles. "Lie down on your stomach, put your head down, and put your arms behind your back." That's when Giles realized he wasn't being robbed. This was something far worse. "Put your head down and close your eyes," the man shouted. He knew that he was about to die. Giles now believed that he was about to be raped before being killed. And since he knew this man was going to kill him, he felt he had nothing to lose in at least attempting to fight. He ripped the tape off of his eyes, pushed himself upright, and through tears yelled, "I can't go down like this." "Get back on the ground," the man yelled. Giles didn't comply this time. The man drew his gun and pointed it at him again. Giles moved in and grabbed the end of the barrel, pushing it away from his body. From what Giles could see behind the hockey mask, the man appeared stunned. And from what Giles could feel in his hand, The gun was plastic. Giles kicked his attacker in the groin, but then the man headbutted Giles. He began punching Giles in the side of the head. Just then, Giles turned to see how far the garage door was open, and as the man grabbed a hold of his jacket, Giles slid right out of it, dropped to the floor, and rolled himself through the slightly ajar garage door and onto the unpaved driveway. As his attacker approached the garage door, he had to briefly let go of Giles in order to roll himself back under. Giles was able to generate enough adrenaline at this point to get onto his feet and start running. He looked up and saw a couple walking their dog. Through his hyperventilation, he said, "There's a guy. He's after me. He's trying to mug me. Please, help me." As the attacker made his way toward the walking path, still wearing his hockey mask, Giles called out, "That's the guy!" Suddenly, the man lifted his mask ever so slightly and said to Giles, "Come on, Frank," motioning him to follow him back towards the garage. And then, miraculously, the couple with their dog began walking away. But then the male turned around and began walking back towards Giles when his female companion called out to him, and he turned back around. "Can you at least stand here and wait and make sure I get back into my truck safely?" The male began walking back towards Giles when his female companion called him back. Weighing his options in that moment, he chose perhaps the riskiest one, returning to his truck, which was parked in front of the garage, still inhabited by the mysterious stranger in the hockey mask. As quietly as he could, he took his keys from his pocket, unlocked his truck, and got inside. Driving home, Giles looked at the dashboard time, and it was 8 o'clock. And he then resolved to make it the rest of the way home so he could report this incident to the authorities. Giles pushed himself to his computer so he could log on to Plenty of Fish and document his entire exchange with Sheena. But when he logged on, he discovered that all of the messages they exchanged had been deleted, and her profile had been deleted too. And by Saturday night, Giles' swelling had subsided enough that at least at first, no one seemed to notice anything unusual about him. On Sunday, the pain grew even worse, and his friend Rebecca actually noticed the bruises on his face immediately. She asked him what happened, and he told her the story. "You've got to go to the police," she said. "I know, you're right," Giles agreed. But privately, he still wasn't sure he was going to. The weekend after he was attacked was Thanksgiving in Canada. That same weekend, Friday, October 10th, exactly 1 week after Giles' attack, a 38-year-old man named Johnny Bryan Altinger told his friends he'd had a hot date that weekend with a woman he'd met on Plenty of Fish. He sent his workmate, Willie, a link to the profile to show off his prospect. But her instructions to her house were very weird, he added. "What do you mean?" Willie asked. "She won't give me her phone number or address," Johnny explained, "but I've got these directions to get to the house and I'm supposed to use the garage to enter. Call me when you get there and give me the address," Dell told him. A little bit later, Dell's phone rang again. It was Johnny. "Hey, I just left," he said. "She wasn't there, but I met a guy in the garage. The guy said he was a filmmaker and he was making a movie. He showed me a replica gun. She's home now. I'm heading over again." Several hours later, having not heard from him, Dell rang Johnny's phone several times, but it went to voicemail each time. The next morning, he tried again. Same thing. By mid-afternoon, Dale was concerned enough to start reaching out to some of their mutuals. Ordinarily, he'd have assumed things had gone swimmingly well, but the strange circumstances Johnny had shared about the date instead made his coworker feel a creeping sense of dread. He called up their mutual friends, Marcel and Carolyn Souza, and told them he thought Johnny had gone missing. They rapped on his front door and waited for a reply, but no one came to the door, and nobody stirred inside. The following morning, on Thanksgiving, Monday, Willie got an email from Johnny, in response to the message he'd sent him over the weekend. Johnny wrote that there was no worries on his end. He and the girl had, quote, hit it off big time. He and his new girlfriend would be leaving on a vacation to the tropics right away. A little later, around 9 a.m., Johnny sent out an email to all of his coworkers and friends, which said that he had met, quote, an extraordinary woman named Jen who has offered to take me on a nice long tropical vacation. And then his boss received a resignation email from him. On Facebook, Johnny's relationship status was changed from single to in a relationship. Some of Johnny's Facebook friends seemed excited for him, but Dale did not share their excitement. Dale wrote Johnny a reply. "Who's going to pick up your brother from the airport?" It was a test question. If it were really Johnny, he wouldn't have any idea what Dale was talking about. However, this message got no reply. A friend of Dale's sent Johnny a message on Facebook and insisted that he phone Dale immediately. Johnny replied that he wouldn't be able to call due to the terrible reception where he was staying. Dale was convinced at this point that Johnny had been murdered. On Thursday, another new status update was published on Johnny's Facebook page, wondering why anyone would leave sun and surf to come back to snow and stress. On Friday, 1 week from the date, Dell, Marcel, and Carolyn returned to Johnny's apartment, and this time they broke into it through an open window. Inside of the apartment, they found dirty dishes in the sink, his suitcase still in the closet, and his toothbrush and shaving kit left behind. And it was when they found his passport too that it made it pretty clear that Johnny hadn't gone out of the country, as his communications were claiming. They called the police together to give them the latest information. And on Facebook, a Find Johnny page was created. Johnny's friends had given the police all the materials they had gathered, including the directions to the home he was last known to have been. Investigators learned that the garage was being rented to a man named Mark Twitchell. On Saturday, October 18th, Twitchell was contacted by police and summoned to the rented garage. The police found the door leading into the backyard area had been screwed shut from the outside, so they broke through it, and immediately the smell of gasoline and char hit their nostrils. Off to the side, there was an oil drum, and on the table was a receipt from a hardware store dated October 15th. For rubber gloves, plastic sheeting, paper towels, a respirator mask, and a bottle of heavy-duty cleaning solvent. The items had been paid for with a MasterCard. One of the officers, Constable Maxwell, took Twitchell inside the police cruiser and asked him to show the officer his MasterCard. Twitchell handed Constable Maxwell the MasterCard, and what do you know? It matched. Twitchell was asked to accompany the police back to the station for an interview. Once there, Twitchell explained to Detective Mike Tabler that he was in the midst of producing a short film, and he explained that the cleaning supplies were all for the fake blood they'd used when shooting the central scene inside of the garage. He asked them if he'd ever heard of the name John Altinger before, and Twitchell denied that he had. And the next time he met with detectives, he mentioned something he'd said he'd forgotten to tell them the last time, which was he'd recently purchased a used car off of a woman for just $40, a red 2005 Mazda 3. This is when detectives realized the gravity of what they were dealing with, a likely murder case. They ran the registration for the vehicle, and it came back to John. The detective, now interrogating Twitchell, told him that he knew he was somehow involved in the disappearance of missing John. Among the items they seized from Twitchell's home was his computer. And on the hard drive of his computer, detectives found parts of a deleted document which had been called SK Confessions. The document opened with, "This story is based on true events. This is the story of my progression into becoming a serial killer. Allow me to start from the beginning, and I think you'll see what I mean." His entries went on to describe how he created a fake profile on Plenty of Fish, lured a single guy to the garage he'd rented, where he was lying in wait, and proceeded to beat and attack the man with a stun baton. As they continued reading, they read about how Johnny showed up to the garage earlier than expected, surprising Twitchell. And when he left and later returned, Twitchell bludgeoned him and stabbed him to death, dismembering him, and then attempted to burn him in the backyard oil drum. But then Twitchell got spooked when he heard a fire engine's sirens. That's when he brainstormed and decided that a sewer would be the last place anyone would look for a body. So he put Johnny's remains in garbage bags and tossed them into a storm sewer. Police arrested Twitchell on October 31st, 2008. Twitchell was charged with first-degree murder and attempted murder. And at the end of the trial, he was sentenced to the maximum penalty, life in prison without the possibility of parole for 25 years. After the trial, he led authorities to where he had dumped Johnny Altinger's remains, and they were able to recover them and return them to his family.